Bonjour tout le monde. That's the only French I know, so don't ask me for directions, or anything like that. So it's a pleasure to be here this morning to talk to you all about cooperative advantage. So I am Leon Prieto, originally from the beautiful Twin Island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. There might be someone else from Trinidad. I don't know where she might be. Yes, so it's just such a pleasure to be here. So the conversation today is on cooperative advantage. And when I think of credit unions, cooperatives, of course, it embodies this whole philosophy and mantra of cooperative advantage. And I make the argument that all organizations should strive to obtain a cooperative advantage. We always hear about competitive advantage, which is fine. But there's also another aspect that we are missing to help humanize capitalism, because I'm a big critic of unbridled capitalism, and we'll talk about that a little bit today. And can we move on to the next slide? Oh, great. So Sankofa, it's an Akan word. Some of you have probably heard of Sankofa, right? And it basically means reflecting on the past so we could chart a bold new future, right? So another translation is go back and get it. So we need to pay attention to lessons from thinkers and doers from the past to chart a bold new future, right? And this also includes indigenous knowledge and philosophies. A lot of times, we just focus on Western thinking, which is fine. It helped us get to this point. But we also have to be honest with ourselves that simply focusing on Western thinking and philosophies, it helped contribute to the polycrisis. And I believe that indigenous knowledge and thinking can help humanize capitalism and fight against unbridled capitalism. And many of these indigenous knowledge and thinking and traditions, it embraces cooperation and empathy, right? So for example, we currently in Canada, so the Cree people, an indigenous group, First People, they have a philosophy called Wakotowin. And it really embraces our shared humanity and interconnectedness, right? And when we travel to Rwanda, they have a system known as Umuganda, which basically means working towards a common purpose. And then one of my favorite philosophies come from South Africa. It's called Ubuntu, which basically means I am because we are. And I'm a professor, so I'm going to ask you for crowd participation. Say, I am because we are. That is actually one of the philosophies that Nelson Mandela subscribed to in South Africa, and also Desmond Tutu as well. So in many parts of Southern Africa, they got these philosophies very similar to Ubuntu. So in Botswana, they have something similar called Buthu. And in Kenya, they got Umaja. So they got very similar philosophies. And even in West Africa, in Ghana, they have this philosophy very similar to Ubuntu. It's called, in English, it's no 9, no 10. So basically, if you prevent your friend from achieving a 9, you will never become a 10, right? So it's not about pulling people down. It's about lifting each other up as human beings. So we have to subscribe to these cooperative notions to help get us to the next level. And many of these traditions, they survived the Middle Passage from Africa to the Americas, be it the United States, where I reside, be it Canada, and also in the Caribbean. Like I was joking earlier on, talking about something known as susu, which is kind of like a money circle, a rotating money circle where we share a pot. And, anyone ever heard of it? A susu? Yeah, so it's a ROSCA. That's the academic term, Rotating Savings and Credit Association. So when I bought my plane ticket to come to the US, I took part in this cooperative, this informal cooperative called a SUSU, and I bought my plane ticket, and here I am. So these cooperative practices can play a role in helping sustain communities and so forth, right? And our brains, believe it or not, is hardwired to cooperate. I mentioned Botswana earlier. There's a very old culture in Botswana. They're the Kong-Sans people, right? The Kong-San people. They're a group of hunter-gatherers. Their culture has persisted for quite a long time, thousands of years. And they believe in cooperation to an extent. Let's say I spend some time with the Kong-San people and I hunt an antelope, and I'm showing off, yes, I got a really big one. They will insult my catch. They call it insulting the meat because I'm bragging about the size of the kill instead of being more humble about it and by not talking about how the group caught this antelope together, I'm just being too individualistic. So they're very much into cooperative practices that have sustained their people for thousands of years. So our brains, it actually releases oxytocin, which boosts trust and connection, right? And our neural networks help us to empathize and work cooperatively. And a little later on, I'll talk about how empathy is becoming a bad word. It's almost like a bad word to talk about empathy these days, which I think is quite ridiculous, so I'll share my bias. But that's where we are today. So a cooperative advantage, and this is rooted in Ubuntu. So these are the benefits that an organization, be it a credit union, social enterprise, a cooperative, or a for-profit company, can possess and accrue due to its people-centered approach to development and sustainability. And this is rooted in a spirit of care and community, meaningful dialogue, and consensus building among employees, customers, even the invisible people within the global supply chain, right? And the value chain in particular. And as I mentioned, it's rooted in African and indigenous traditions of cooperation. And Ubuntu is just one of them. So there are many different types of indigenous traditions that embrace cooperation that we should also pay attention to. And the reason we should pay attention to it is to tackle what I consider to be the cause of the polycrisis, unbridled capitalism. So we tend to have a very myopic focus on extraction and exploitation, be it minerals, be it exploiting the land. We see a lot of monoculture taking place in agriculture when we should be utilizing more regenerative approaches to agriculture. So this focus on extraction and exploitation, particularly of labor, is causing a lot of problems. Then the climate crisis, of course, and we spent some time at this summit talking about that. And then we see pervasive loss of biodiversity, not just in Brazil, but in many parts of the world as well. So Brazil tends to get a lot of attention due to the rainforest, but there are other rainforests throughout the world. And then, treating workers as disposable. And in this age of AI, that last point is becoming, much more prominent. People are nervous about AI and so forth. People are wondering about their futures. And some workers are concerned about, what's going to be their future profession, right? So we have to try to rethink capitalism. And I believe capitalism in its unbridled form is contributing to the brokenness of our shared humanity. And those indigenous traditions I talked about previously is all about shared humanity. So how do we get back to that, right? And many firms, I argue, are failing the stakeholder capitalism test. people are good at talking about it. Or we're doing this, we're going to do that, to help with our ESG numbers and so forth. But are we actually making the bold steps needed to turn capitalism into a more just and human-centered economic system? And there's different philosophies that try to tackle this. Some of you have probably heard of degrowth economics, which is an alternative to what we're doing today. We're all about consumption, 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 and growth, growth, growth. But we are growing towards what outcome, So some may consider degrowth economics to be too radical, but based on what's happening now, we may need radical solutions, to help save this planet. So we have to try to rebuild economic systems around community ownership, and this helps restore balance to capitalism. And we have to continue to create spaces for credit unions and cooperatives, that place people and well-being at the center. Or at least I hope you'll place people at the center, So that's my assumption. So I mentioned earlier about the disdain shown towards empathy today. There's this one person, I won't call his name, but he's actually a Canadian citizen, but I won't call his name. He also aspires to be a trillionaire, but I won't call his name. He recently stated, the fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy. When I heard that, I was like, what? And I guess I was living under a rock because I was clueless towards all of this disdain towards empathy, especially as it relates to capitalism. And another influential person who I won't name, I'm not going to put power to their names, he stated, empathy is dangerous and toxic and should be stricken from the dictionary. And he also mentioned the Christian dictionary as well. And I was like, wow, these are some strong statements about a trait that I think we should all embody. So maybe I'm living in a bizarre world right now, I don't know. But this is where we are. But the funny thing is, a lot of these folks, they're railing against capitalism. Well, not capitalism, they're railing against empathy when the person who they revere as the godfather of modern-day capitalism, Adam Smith, when he wrote one of his seminal books, he talked about the importance of balancing empathy with self-interest. So most people, they know his famous work, The Wealth of Nations. But prior to The Wealth of Nations, he wrote a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. So he's seen as an economist, but he was actually a moral philosopher, right? And he wrote extensively about the need for sympathy towards others, which is how he framed empathy back then, right? So he talked about the importance of balancing empathy with self-interest. And Adam Smith believed that people make better choices in business and in life when they care about how their actions affect others. And in other words, markets work best when people act with empathy, not just for profit. And I have a quote there from him. He actually said, man naturally desires not only to be loved, but to be lovely. And that came from Adam Smith. And when I was younger, when I always thought about Adam Smith, I always looked at him as, like a Gordon Gekko type character, greed is good type thing. But this is actually his quote. So people just tend to look at a few pages of his subsequent work, The Wealth of Nations, and they forget about his prior work, which dealt with empathy, sympathy towards others, etc. So I believe it's possible to reimagine a lovelier version of capitalism by embracing empathy and cooperation via the so-called alternative models. And I'll be honest, I work for a business school. I teach management, etc., social innovation. And I would say 100% of business schools, let me rephrase that. Maybe 99% of business schools in the US do not talk about so-called alternative models like cooperatives and credit unions extensively, right? They may talk about it in passing, but not in a robust way, right? So like, I know in Canada, in Nova Scotia, they got St. Mary's University, which teaches about the cooperative business model. And I always admired that university from afar for many years. And I just wish more business schools in the US embrace that approach when it came to their curriculum. And in some research I did a few years ago with some colleagues from University of Cambridge, we did a paper that was published in one of the Academy of Management journals, which looked at a historically black university in the US that actually taught the cooperative model within their business school in the 1920s. And so a lot of African Americans subscribed to cooperatives and credit unions in the past, in the early 20th century, but some were actually criticized for starting cooperatives and credit unions. They were told they were being communist. And to be a good American, you got to embrace these capitalistic ideals. So many of them moved away from the alternative models, which I think should be the normative. So it kind of irks me when people refer to co-ops and credit unions as alternative financing models, etc. Right? So to embrace a lovelier capitalism, we should embrace different business models like credit unions, cooperatives, of course, B corporations, and social enterprises. And we should touch upon these topics much more within business schools and so forth, and not even in business schools, just in general, right? Next slide. So credit unions, prioritize shared prosperity, environmental stewardship, and I must acknowledge Caisse Populaire, which is the oldest credit union in North America, which was founded, in Quebec by Alphonse Desjardins, to serve the humblest classes. So we have to pay credit to him for starting a quiet revolution that we can all learn from. But I think we might need to be a little bit more louder when it comes to talking about the benefits of credit unions, etc. So worldwide, we are seeing credit unions investing in climate change, response initiatives. We have Cooperación Verde in Colombia. They invested in reforestation and soil health. And Security in Brazil, they are financing social energy projects with 4,000 installations. Then we got the World Council of Credit Unions who recently received a $1.8 million grant to launch a climate finance pilot in West African credit unions. And it's going to benefit countries such as Benin, Senegal, Togo, etc. So credit unions are playing a very big role, and I'm proud to be from a country that has a credit union culture in Trinidad. So it was just part of my life growing up, but it's very different in the US, but in Canada, it's still embraced. And one thing we definitely embrace in many parts of the global south are Roscas, which I mentioned previously, right? And some Roscas are getting sophisticated. Some are utilizing blockchain technologies, supporting climate justice and regenerative economies. So there's a Rosca in Kenya, it's known as Chama. That's what they call it, C-H-A-M-A. So Chamas are actually a tool used by many women to purchase homes and livestock and equipment to start businesses, etc. And then right here in Canada, there's a Rosca network, and I must acknowledge the work done by Dr. Caroline Shanaz Hussein and Andrea Barrett. So they started this Rosca group to, to empower mostly women and some men as well. So they empower women to save money and start businesses, etc., with these Roscas. And credit unions could actually play a role in helping to formalize some of these Roscas by partnering with these informal saving circles to create regulated Rosca accounts, right? And in that way, it could help preserve cultural trust, because trust is a big part of Roscas. You don't let anybody join your susu, anybody off the street. You got to actually trust these people, right? So credit unions could help preserve that cultural trust while ensuring transparency and security. So there's this credit union in Trinidad. It's called Agricola Credit Union that actually has a SUSU type account within their credit union. And then in Jamaica, they're doing the same thing with JTA Co-op Credit Union. So in Jamaica, SUSU is called Partner. In Guyana, it's called Box Hand. In Kenya, it's called Chama. So they're utilizing these old cultural traditions and embedding it within credit unions. So it's all about designing inclusive financial products, so by offering more structured interest-bearing cycles with digital tracking and financial literacy, you can really help the underbanked build credit history, right? So just a way to reach out to the community and really help in that regards. So you could also empower economic mobility by using that Rosca model to extend credit union membership, right? Because there are many people who still distrust financial institutions, so it's a good way to kind of meet people where they are, right? And talking about Canada, one movement I've been inspired by for many years was the Antigonish movement in Nova Scotia. The pioneering work of Father Jimmy Tompkins and Father Moses Cody and others, they combined adult education with cooperatives and microfinance to empower rural maritime communities to improve their economic and social well-being. And the good thing about the work that they did, Moses Cody did, he actually influenced not just people in Canada, but worldwide. And one person he influenced was this person by the name of Father Albert McKnight. He was a New Yorker, and he was a priest, Catholic priest, and he was assigned to a parish in Louisiana. So he spent many years working in Louisiana, and he started his own quiet revolution based on the knowledge he learned in Canada, took it to Louisiana, I want to say the Lafayette area of Louisiana, and he played a role in founding the Southern Consumers Cooperative. They had 2,000 black farmer members. He played a role in organizing 75 co-ops, credit unions, minority businesses across the US. And he faced a lot of flack, a lot of criticism. He was called communist by a lot of folks for what he was trying to do. But he persevered, and he created a cooperative movement in the US. And so Nova Scotia played a role in his education, and he became a pioneer. Then in the Global South, we are seeing cooperatives utilizing historical resilience and making a difference in various industries. So in Trinidad, there's this cooperative called the Moruga Hill Rice Cooperative Society Limited. And that was founded to create more opportunities to grow something known as Moruga Hill rice. This was a rice which originated from Africa that was grown in the US during slavery, and it's now lost in the US, funny enough. But during, I want to say the War of 1812, there were some enslaved Africans who escaped the plantations, fought with the British, and they preserved some of the rice, and they were sent to Nova Scotia, and then some were eventually sent to Trinidad. where they started growing growing the rice in South Trinidad in a place called Moruga. And this cooperative today is still promoting this rice. It's actually a superfood. And the young woman who's running it, her name is Rachel Ann Cooper Lee. And so she's maintaining that tradition of growing the rice within that cooperative. And the people who live in Moruga, they are descendants of what is known as Americans. So they were enslaved Africans who lived in America, and they took on the title Americans when they arrived in Trinidad in the early 1800s. And social enterprises, of course, play a big role in helping communities achieve social sustainability, and credit unions can play that supporting role. So we see pioneering work done by Van City and their social enterprise partnership funding programs that's really making a difference. So I have to give kudos to any cooperatives that are playing a role in helping these social enterprises really make a difference, right? So Charles Clinton Spaulding, he's the father of African-American management. I did a lot of research on him, and they actually used to call him Mr. Corporation. He got his start working in a cooperative, and he was one of the founders of the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company in 1898. So they embody that spirit of cooperation within that Black Wall Street in the US. So Durham, North Carolina was a Black Wall Street. And when W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a great American sociologist, visited Durham, he said, "This city has embraced cooperation over capitalism," right? So we need to go back to those times. But Spaulding, he was a big proponent of this cooperative mindset. And he also said there must be social service in business. And he said that in 1937, long before terms like social innovation and social sustainability was even a thing. So we can do good and do well at the same time by embodying these principles of cooperative advantage, whether it's a spirit of care and community, dialogue, and consensus building. So we must try to embody those principles to advance ourselves as a species. So we have to ask ourselves this question. So what if credit unions become the architects of regeneration, channeling capital to restore communities, not just grow profits, where every loan, investment, and policy uplifted all stakeholders, right? And by measuring success, we can't just look at dollars. We also have to look at shared prosperity, where inclusion, dignity, and care define true wealth. And one thing I would like to see is credit union leaders and cooperative leaders serve on corporate boards, right, to help humanize these boards, right? So you can't change capitalism if you keep appointing unbridled capitalists to serve on a board. So you need credit union leaders, cooperative leaders to serve on these boards to really champion sustainable development and cooperative advantage. And one example from history is a person, he has a lovely first name. His name is Leon Sullivan, Reverend Leon Sullivan. He was an American, born in West Virginia, and he embraced cooperative economics. And he used to cause good trouble. When he had his church in Philadelphia, there were these companies that were not hiring African Americans. And he was like, okay, if you don't want to hire us, we're not going to support your businesses. So he started a program called the Selected Patronage Program. And the first company he targeted was a company called Tasty Cakes. They make these nice pastries and so forth. When people stopped purchasing Tasty Cakes, they got so nervous about their future, they decided, you know what? We're going to hire African Americans to work for Tasty Cakes. So his Selected Patronage Program, it worked like a charm. And he was even appointed to the board of General Motors. And he caused good trouble on that board as well. And he helped a lot of these companies that worked with GM fight against apartheid in South Africa. So he also received like a vote of thanks from Nelson Mandela. So we need more cooperative leaders, more credit union leaders to serve on boards and to help fight for a truly lovelier version of capitalism, one rooted in empathy, cooperation, and shared prosperity. So that's my time for now, but I'll be happy with questions, and now we're going to have a nice discussion with Juan. So I hope you don't stump me too hard with these questions.
Thank you very, very much. This was a really awesome overview of that cooperative advantage. As Patrick said earlier, my name is Juan. I'm from Louisiana. And Louisiana is a state that has been disproportionately affected by climate change. Today, the population in New Orleans is 100,000 people fewer than it was 20 years ago when Hurricane Katrina caused devastation in the state. So I think you did a really amazing job of highlighting that cooperative advantage when faced with today's challenges. And I think we have a tremendous amount of global challenges today. So as you look at cooperatives and credit unions, what do you see as the low-hanging fruit when it comes to what could credit unions and cooperatives do today to really affect sustainability worldwide and in their communities?
Oh, yes. So credit unions and cooperatives, thankfully, many of them are actually playing a big role today in when it comes to confronting sustainability issues, climate change issues, and so forth. And then to quote Father Albert McKnight, who's a hero of mine, you got to meet people where they are, right? So a big part of that is adult education. So people need to understand, the ramifications of not helping with these ESG goals and climate goals and so forth. So in the cooperative movement, study circles played a big role, right? So we have to go back to those old days where there are conversations with the people. And I know in this age of AI, we tend to get more hands-off. But I believe we need to go back to the people, have these robust conversations about ways in which we could aid in social sustainability and community well-being, and have that high-touch approach. Let AI take care of the busy work, but let the people do the hard work, right? So meeting people where they are, have these conversations that is more personal versus being impersonal. And I think you can really move the needle by having these robust conversations with communities.
Thank you. And let's go deeper into that, because right now, AI it's really what's fueling at least the American economy and the GDP growth of the country. Many people believe it's the future. Historically, for co-ops and credit unions, it's been that empathy, that local touch, that personal touch and relationship that has really fueled our growth. So how do you balance those two, the need for automation and the need for taking advantage of the opportunities that AI bring with our historical bond with communities and members?
Yeah, I look at AI as just another emerging technology. And as someone said in a prior panel, Mr. Helms, he talked about, all of these emerging technologies through different generations. And so it's a tool, definitely, but some people are looking at it as a panacea to solve all problems, which it is not. So we have to train models based on cooperative values. That's how cooperatives and credit unions could utilize AI. You could also train it to flag accounts of members who may be going through some financial hardships. So you could flag those accounts and then put humans to work, right, to reach out to those individuals. So you need to find that happy medium almost. So definitely utilize the technology, but don't treat it as a panacea to solve all of our problems, you know. But it's essential that we continue doing the hard work, right? But AI could take care of a number of the mundane tasks and busy work.
I love that. Have you heard of a great example of an organization, it doesn't have to be a co-op or credit union, that has started leveraging AI for good in that way?
I think Kiva utilizes AI to a certain degree. So they have microfinance firm, you know. So I think I read somewhere about them utilizing AI to, I guess, identify potential micro businesses that they could support, you know. So I don't know too many, but that's one that comes to mind. But we need to be very careful, as the prior speaker spoke about, in the terms of we need to have guardrails in place to ensure that we just don't go off the rails with an overdependence on AI. And I used to be one of those people who was very skeptical of AI. I was like, oh my goodness, we're heading to a Terminator type world now, you know. But if we put guardrails in place within our industry, I think we could utilize it for more social good.
Thank you. That's great. So, if you were addressing a group of credit union CEOs, managers, and they were trying to build a case to their board of directors about how sustainability makes a good business sense, what would your advice be to them as far as how to approach that?
Interesting, you know. So I know credit union boards, they could comprise of people within the industry and outside the industry as well. And a lot of times we make a good moral case, but there are some who prefer to hear a smart business case. And I think we just need to become better storytellers in terms of telling a story about how the company, how the credit union, how the industry is actually moving a needle and making a difference, you know, be it by reduced operating costs and by utilizing a case and just amplifying the case of, let's say, a fictional company called Green Roots, instead of just saying, okay, this is how we helped maybe 10, 15 companies this past year, but instead focus on a couple of cases, tell their story, how they reduced pollution in some way, talk about certain metrics that really move the needle as it refers to ESG goals, etc. But we have to become better storytellers about the impact we are making for the board. But in the US, where I'm based, you also have to know that audience. There are some folks, when you talk to them about sustainability, you know, their eyes glaze over. They don't really want to hear it. They get turned off. But when you talk to them in the language of economics, of money, then, you know, you may get their attention. So it's basically a case of knowing thy audience and telling that story to suit thy audience.
Thank you very much. So today you gave us a history lesson. I learned of leaders, historic leaders that I had never heard of, and even in the state I live in. So, and I appreciate that. That was really awesome. Who inspires you today and why?
There's this cooperative network known as Boston Ujima Project. So they're based in Boston, Massachusetts. So they're a community that embodies this whole cooperative mindset, and they actually fund cooperatives and also social enterprises and help them start businesses. So it's almost like a fund, and they also have study circles that they do as well, and they meet virtually as well. And I think they already invested in maybe they invested $3 million in different enterprises. So it's run by Nia Evans, and she works with a group of young people in Boston. They're all fired up and they're very motivated to really make a difference within Boston, especially within underestimated communities in Boston. So it's really refreshing to see young people embracing this cooperative mindset and really making a difference in terms of starting enterprises and funding opportunities for local communities. So I'm very motivated by them, and I'm also a solidarity member of that organization. I'm not a voting member because I don't live in Boston, but I like to join these cooperatives, even from afar, because I admire what they do.
I love that. I love that. And what a great way to end this Q&A portion. Because I think with all the challenges that are going on in the world, it can be very easy to become cynical and lose hope. And it's stories like that make me really hopeful for what's to come. So with that, I think we have some time for questions from the audience. So are there any questions from the folks here? And what questions do we have from the internet?
As is the room.
They're processing.
Don't let me pick on you, I'm a professor.
Yeah, call on someone.
Thank you. Terrific presentation. I'm also inspired by the last comments you made about the young people, and I worry about our ability to engage younger folks who certainly could propel our movement forward. How would you suggest we continue to involve and inspire young people? What are some things that we need to do to attract them and to retain them?
Great question. And I would say visitations to different tertiary institutions, be it universities, community colleges, even high schools as well, to let them know about credit unions and other cooperative type enterprises to show that we exist and this is what we are doing. Because many young people may not be familiar with this model and the benefits of it. So just getting in touch with different universities, be it career services or even your friendly neighborhood professor like myself. I welcome credit union leaders and cooperative leaders to my classrooms to talk about this model and how it works, and also examples about how it does not work as well. We have to show both sides. So I think that plays a big role. So meeting people where they are at these different schools and tertiary education.
I'd add one thing to that. Get to know the other co-op leaders in your community of other sectors. I've always thought that as credit unions, perhaps we can't solve all the problems that the world faces, but together as a movement, as a sector, as a cooperative sectors, we're unstoppable.
Absolutely.
I have a question about your thoughts about new social norms, specifically as they relate to social media and social networks. Cooperatives in and of themselves are a social network. However, nowadays, the concept of the social network has evolved to the internet. Do you see an opportunity there to redefine cooperatives' efforts at taking advantage of electronic social media?
Absolutely. Cooperatives and credit unions should definitely reach out to young people to serve as interns and get the social media, make it more, let me use an old-fashioned term, hip. I guess I'm an old-school person, so I can't really think of a new term for that. But I have some students at my university. They're all about utilizing TikTok and those other channels to really promote businesses. I have this one student in particular. She has grown sales for a number of companies by just serving as interns, by making those companies come alive on social media. So that's the age we live in, and we just have to embrace it and not be so skeptical about entering this so-called brave new world. So social media can play a really big role in amplifying the work done by credit unions and cooperatives.